ever since Rise of Kingdoms revealed the skills for Bai Qi, he has been the talk of the town in the Rise of Kingdoms community, because it seems like Infantry are getting yet another super powerful open field PvP commander. But today we're going to play devil's advocate, because not everything is sunshine and rainbows when it comes to Bai Qi's kit. There's definitely some flaws that we need to talk about. So today I'm going to do something that the internet hates. I am going to have a nuanced take. I know, ladies and gentlemen, but bear with me, okay? Bear with me, grab a drink, take a seat, get comfortable, relax. Before we jump in, of course, what's going on, guys? Cheers. Now, as you guys know, I am a partnered creator with Rise of Kingdoms, so if you guys want more Rise of Kingdoms content, make sure you subscribe and take 1 second to drop a quick thumbs up. Really appreciate it. Okay, now obviously the number one thing that you're wondering is, Omniarch, why are you in the top left corner of the screen? Because you're always in the bottom left corner of the screen, and don't worry, we're going to talk about that later. The reason is data. We're going to be talking about data in this video, and so I need to put myself in a different part of the screen. But this video is very important, okay, because we're going to take a look at how good Bai Qi actually appears, at least on paper, compared to his peers in Rise of Kingdoms, and we'll see if he's just as good as he initially seemed to be. Now, if you guys want a more in-depth review of all the skills, I made a video the other day when the brand new infantry commanders were first revealed, but the TLDR for Bai Qi is that his first two skills look superb. The active skill is a 5 target smite damage AoE, and each target has a 30% chance to take an additional 15% extra damage. With a damage factor of 2400, this makes it one of the strongest active skills in the game. Second skill is 50% of infantry stats plus 20% march speed. Most of that is attack, which he will benefit from because his damage factor is so high. But the third and fourth skills and the expertise are where the red flags start to show up. Okay, so let's start by going a little bit more in depth with the malice effect. Now, there's a couple of different ways that you will gain stacks of malice for Bai Qi. You will always gain them in stacks of 10, and you will always spend them in stacks of 10. And the reason for this is because the game is going to be comparing your number of stacks to the percentage of units remaining for your enemy and for your army. So Ravager of the Land and Spirit says if you're attacking a troop on the map, you will gain 10 stacks of malice whenever you use an active skill. Okay, that's pretty good to know. Another thing worth noting here is that this first bullet point does not have a listed cooldown, and even if we assume that this first bullet point is subject to the same cooldown as is seen on the second bullet point, of that being 1 second, what we know is that because there's a second of downtime in between active skill launches, then we know, or at least we can assume based on the way this is worded, that you will gain 10 stacks of malice for the primary and 10 stacks of malice for the secondary. So every full skill cycle you should gain 20 stacks of malice, assuming both commanders launch their active skill. Now, before we read this second bullet point, let's also take a look at the fourth skill. It says when attacking a field troop, you gain 10 stacks of malice upon entering combat. All right, so you're just going to start the battle with 10 stacks of malice, which is pretty nice. And for every 10% of units that you lose, you will gain 10 stacks of malice. So when you enter the battle, let's say you have 100% troop capacity, troop health, whatever, your march is perfectly flawless. It is full to the brim with every possible unit. When you go from 100% army capacity down to 90% army capacity, you will gain another 10 stacks of malice. And so you can gain a total of 9 stacks of malice this way, although as you get lower and lower, this benefit starts to get worse and worse, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. Okay, so now we know a couple of things. First of all, you start the battle with 10 stacks. Each active skill will give you 10 stacks, and every 10% of units that you lose, you will also gain 10 stacks. So by the time you hit 90% health, you probably will already have 40 stacks of malice, which means if you're attacking an enemy that is 39% troop capacity or lower, then you're going to trigger this second part of the third skill, and it says if the number of malice stacks is higher than the target's percentage of units remaining, you spend 10 malice stacks to deal smite damage to the target with a damage factor of 300. It also gains a 10% bonus to severe wounds inflicted and a 20% bonus to rage recovery speed for 1 second with a 1 second cooldown. So here you can see that as you're gaining more and more stacks of malice, you're going to be spending them to pop the target with 300 damage factor, 300 damage factor, 300 damage factor, and this seems good, except I don't actually love this mechanic very much. Now, there's other parts to the kit here where you actually gain 5% bonus of smite damage dealt up to 30% for every 10% of units that is missing for you. Okay, so not only are you gaining 10 stacks of malice for every 10% of troops that you're losing, but you're increasing your smite damage by 5% every single time. So if you're at 90% units remaining, you will have an additional 10 stacks of malice, an additional 5% bonus to smite damage. Now when some people first read this skill, they thought perhaps you'd be gaining stacks of malice for percent of units that the enemy has lost, right? So let's say you go into battle with a target and they're at 70%, well then you would gain 30 stacks of malice. That's not how this is worded. Okay, it says when attacking a field troop, their troop gains, and by their troop they mean your troop, right? Because look at the first bullet point, 10 stacks of malice upon entering combat. Why would their troop, the enemy, be gaining 10 stacks of malice? That makes no sense. So therefore their troop here is referencing your army, right? Your Bai Qi. Therefore it losing 10% refers to your troop. Okay, so that's how this works. So you're going to gain more and more stacks of malice based on two conditions. First of all, how long are you able to survive in the open field? Because the more that you're surviving, the more that you're fighting, the more active skills you pop and the more stacks of malice you gain from the third skill. Additionally, as your army gets weaker, you're also going to gain stacks of malice and smite damage. And on the expertise, you have a couple of interesting things. Now first of all, this first bullet point, I made a huge mistake in my first video saying that this was a reasonable number of units, and that's because when I read this, my brain thought 40,000 units. I don't know why. I just read this and I was like, oh yeah, 40,000 units, like that's a reasonable number that you could achieve at some point. But no, it is 400,000 enemy units, which that is 4 million powers worth of T5 units, right? Every tier 5 unit is 10 power. So if you wound 400,000 enemy units, you'd have to subtract 4 million power from the cumulative players that you've been hitting while you're out in the field. That seems like almost like they just threw this in here as a nod towards the sort of historical significance to Bai Qi. Okay, so this first bullet point, you're gonna have this almost never, right? At least from what I can tell, unless something changes. Of course, you know, this says images are for illustration purposes only, in-game content is subject to change. So they could change this to slightly wounded units, right? They could change this to something else entirely, so who knows, right? But at the time of recording this seems a little bit ridiculous. The second and third bullet points here are also interesting, right? Because not only are you gaining stacks of malice as you're getting weaker, as we see right here, but when you hit 50% units remaining, so half your army is gone, you deal 60% more damage and take 30% less damage for the next 6 seconds. Now that is a really powerful buff for a very weak army for only 6 seconds, right? So all in all, I don't love this buff. And then it gets, you know, it gets even worse, right? When you hit 15% units remaining, okay, so when you're 3 seconds away from dying, you're going to get 100% more damage and take 50% less damage for 6 seconds. Again, this doesn't really move the needle in my opinion very much. Okay, the more that you think about it, the worse this actually sounds, because let's use an example that has been in the game for a long time, the expertise on Leonidas. If this commander's troop falls below 10% units remaining, it deals 400% more damage and takes 50% less damage for the next 10 seconds. You would think, wow, that's really good, except the amount of damage you deal is directly related to the amount of units that you have remaining, right? So I mean, this is actually not that good of a skill. It just simply isn't. Now maybe if this was part of like a rally or something, sure, okay, possibly, right? And he came out with Guan Yu, who was a rallying commander, so maybe, you know, back in the day the idea was that you would use him in a rally and maybe that would help this, right? Perhaps. But the point that I'm making here is that because your army gets weaker and weaker and weaker as you lose more and more units, buffing your army, especially for only 6 seconds as a result of that, really doesn't move the needle that much. It truly does not. Now of course, all of this is on paper, all of this has to be tested, and you know, you're getting a little bonus here, a little bonus here, you're getting a little bonus here for every 10%, like it all could add up, right? It could all add up and it could be really, really good. But my point is that historically, throughout the entirety of Rise of Kingdoms history, any commander that gains bonuses as they lose their own army's troop capacity has not been very good. If we look at a commander such as Boudica Prime, for example, she was a great example of this fundamental flaw. The second skill says if she has a less than 80% units remaining, you gain 30% defense. Well, a lot of your firepower comes in those first 20% of units that you would be losing, and also you feel very squishy for those first 20% of units remaining, because at that point you have no defense on the kit at all, right? And so Boudica is another example of a commander where on paper this looks really solid, but in practice she always felt really squishy, right? I mean, a lot of people felt that way, even though you would argue 30% defense is a decent amount of stats. It just never really felt that way. And so in the same vein as that, this stacking smite damage is going to slightly offset the fact that you're going to be dealing less damage because you're losing units, but it's not going to make up for the fact that you've lost units, right? Even combining this with combining this, it's not going to make up for the fact that you're just going to be dealing less damage over time, right? It's nice that it's there, but it's nothing crazy. Now that's the number one problem that I have with Bai Qi. It's that he's gaining smite damage as he's getting more and more useless, right? I mean, the closer you get to 0 troops, the less damage you're dealing, the more useless you are in the field. He's gaining stacks of malice as he's losing his units. He's gaining bonus damage and tankiness as he's losing a significant amount of his units. And so a lot of these buffs are kind of coming to you at the part of the battle where they don't matter as much, right? Under 50%, like you're really struggling to deal damage under 50%, right? So having a ton of stacks and malice and 25% more smite damage is nice, but you're going to spend those stacks of malice when you start to pop this 300 damage factor. Now, okay, so that's sort of the devil's advocate version of why these skills are actually not that good. Where do they shine, right? What is the point of all of this? Like, if it's not that good, what is it good for? Because obviously there has to be a design in mind from the developers when they make this. Well, the point is that Bai Qi is, as his name suggests, the deity of death. He is the one that should be cleaning up the weakened enemy armies. You see somebody on yellow, Bai Qi should be taking care of them. You see somebody on red, even better, take care of them, right? Because again, let's say you have 70 stacks of malice and you're hitting somebody who's at 30% troop capacity. Okay, well, you hit him with the 300 damage factor. Now you have 60 stacks of malice. Then there's a second of downtime, and well, wouldn't you know it, you still have more stacks of malice than they have units remaining, because remember, they were at 30%, you have 60%. So now, okay, there was a second of downtime, boom, you hit him with another 300 damage factor, then you wait a second, then boom, you hit him with another 300 damage factor, right? And so what's going to happen is, as you build up your stacks of malice, if you then swing your focus to a red army, it's going to be 300, 300, 300, 300. You're going to be popping this and you're going to whittle that target down really, really fast, right? And remember, every time you do this, they're also going to take 10% more sev wounds for 1 second, and you're going to recover rage faster, which means you're going to gain your stacks of malice back by gaining that rage even quicker, right? So in that way, Bai Qi is really good. His kit is like built to effectively melt those weaker targets, and not only are you going to kill them faster, but it's actually going to hurt them more to be hit by Bai Qi than anybody else because of this 10% bonus sev wounds, right? So that's kind of the give and take here, right? It's a slow burn commander, and historically gaining a bunch of these benefits as you are getting weaker has historically been very bad in Rise of Kingdoms. But the way that this kit is built, he's going to be able to machine gun out this smite damage if you start targeting those weaker marches as you are, later in the battle, as you have a ton of stacks of malice already. So that's kind of the devil's advocate nuanced take about these skills. So they really, they have a function and they will hurt if you play that way, but historically this type of stacking bonus has not been very good. Now, that is not the only problem with Bai Qi, right? There is one other glaringly obvious problem with Bai Qi, and that is he's a glass cannon, right? There is virtually no tanky stats on him at all. He has 10% health. That's worse than William Wallace, which is crazy, right? There is no all damage taken reduction. There is no skill damage taken reduction. There's no normal damage taken reduction. There's really nothing, right? Actually, there's nothing. There's no tankiness on Bai Qi at all besides that 10% health, which is not a lot. It's a very small amount of tanky stats here. And so the problem that we're going to run into with Bai Qi is that he is going to be a glass cannon. And even if you pair him with somebody like Liu Che has 20% defense, and that's it. I mean, he can debuff the target to cause them to deal less damage, right? But there's nothing tanky about Liu Che inherently, right? At all. So all in all, this March, if you run Bai Qi with Liu Che, which I think is probably like the single best smite pairing that you can do in the game, right? Now, I know a lot of people, myself included, have talked about if you run 3 infantry, then you split them up and you run Bai Qi with Philip, for example, and you still run the Liu Che with Alex or Liu Che with William Wallace, and then you run the Ragnar with CP. Scorpio, right? That would be the three potentially. Obviously testing has to be done. We're still very early on in the life cycle of Bai Qi, right? He's not in the game yet. So my point is that if you did run Bai Qi with Liu Che, you're going to get 20% defense, 10% health. Nothing else on any of their skills is tanky at all. So you will have a very high damage dealing glass cannon army, which could be good and it could be bad, right? And like I said before, your Bai Qi with Liu Che is going to benefit more from actually targeting those weaker armies than anybody else, right? Now the last thing I want to mention here with Bai Qi is something that I mentioned in my pinned comment when he was revealed, and that is that his AoE is a half circle, which is crazy, right? It's actually crazy. It's already a great thing. So okay, so now we know the two downsides, right? The two major fatal flaws that I can see with Bai Qi on day 3 of him being revealed, right? Or day 4, I don't even remember how many days it's been, but before he's even in the game yet, those are his fatal flaws. 1, he is an absolute glass cannon with Liu Che, and 2, his bonuses to his damage happen as you're losing units typically, and that historically has not been very good in Rise of Kingdoms because of how the damage formula actually works in this game, right? Everything scales off of how many troops you have, and so if you have less troops, you're just starting at a bad spot, right? So now that we know that, right, now that we've taken a little bit of a deep dive into Bai Qi's kit here, and we've explained it a little better than we did in our first video covering Bai Qi, does that change my opinion, right? Do I still think he's going to be one of the best commanders in the game? And the answer is probably, right? He is probably going to be one of the best commanders in the game. Now the reason that I think that is strictly because his first 2 skills, and I said this in my reveal video, but there's a lot of smite damage here. It's a 5 target AoE, and there's a lot of stats with march speed, right? And that's kind of like, that is like historically been very good, right? Strong AoE with march speed and lots of stats has been good. Now there's not tanky stats there, but you can still make it work, right? That is my opinion. Now comparing Bai Qi to Liu Che, who's stronger? I actually think it's Liu Che. I do. I think Liu Che is a stronger complete package than Bai Qi, not only because he has some extra defense there, but also because he has his combo attacks with the rage regeneration. All in all, I think Liu Che is a more complete package, right? So if you are a brand new player and you're trying to decide, should I save up for Bai Qi or should I get Liu Che? My answer is, first of all, well, he's almost here, so why don't you just hold off a little bit, wait for him to come into the game, see some test results, and then we'll figure it out. But if I had to choose one today, I would say that most likely Liu Che is going to be a better complete package as a commander than Bai Qi, even though his active skill has a higher damage factor for the same number of targets in a fan shape, right? Okay, now let's jump into some of that so-called data that we referred to earlier, where we do some napkin math to see just how much damage are you actually going to be getting from Bai Qi's active skill, or what I actually prefer to do is how much damage can you expect from him on a full skill cycle, right? Because the active skill isn't the start and end of the value of a commander, right? They're doing other things on their other skills, and so if you're not looking at those things as well, then you're kind of looking at one skill in a vacuum, and that's not that helpful. So what we're going to do is actually break out a chart that I first showed off in my Ragnar Prime video. I talked about the truth behind Ragnar Prime, and in that video I showed this with a couple of graphs that we'll show in just a moment, and we're going to do the same thing for Bai Qi. Now there's a little bit of a caveat here that I have to mention, and that is that I found, I believe, 2 errors in that previous formula. The first one was a max target error that I had on Zhuge Liang, so all in all that actually wasn't that impactful because he's not even an infantry commander. I was just using him as an example. And then the other thing is I tweaked the additional damage on Liu Che, and I'll explain that in a second. But as you can see here, we have William Wallace, Ragnar Prime, Guan Yu, CPO Prime, Liu Che, Bai Qi, Zhuge Liang, and King Arthur, right? And I think that this is going to be helpful for a lot of you guys, because a lot of people have been saying, well, okay, is Bai Qi's active skill actually better than King Arthur or not? I think King Arthur's better, and we'll talk about that in a minute, because this video will paint a very clear picture as to which of the active skills is better, and it's actually not even close. And well, yeah, I'll leave it at that. So anyway, here we have the actual damage factor. Okay, this is what it literally says in the skill, and this is the number of targets that you hit. Now I know what you're thinking, William Wallace hits more than one target. The answer is yes, but no. If he's being targeted, yeah. If he's not, no. And most of the time the answer is no. So that's kind of where we're at here. So let's go ahead and reveal the data for William Wallace, just so that way we have an idea as to how the spreadsheet works. So here we see the total damage here is just the damage factor times the number of targets, and that's 2400. Okay, easy peasy. Additional damage, this is basically on the active skill of William Wallace. It says right here it's 300 damage factor to up to 3 targets. If you're being swarmed down by 3 targets, you're probably being swarmed down by at least 5 targets, just to be real with you. And if that's the case, then this you know, GG to William Wallace, because he doesn't have that many tanky stats either, to be honest with you guys. But either way, that is this. The maximum amount of additional damage factor is 900. Okay, the skills bonus, this is the amount of bonus that he will get from his skills, right? So as you guys know, he gets 10% bonus to normal damage and 10% bonus to smite damage, so that's 20%. And then he also gets a 40% bonus 4 out of 5 times. So really I equate this to about 32%, right? Remember, this is napkin math, so it's not exact, but most of the time it'll be 40, sometimes it'll be 0, right? So that's kind of how that works, how the math works out. So on average, this is 32, 42, 52. Okay, so that's where we get the 52% bonus to normal damage for the active skill. And then the other damage buffs is actually the pincer formation, right? Most likely we will be using the pincer formation on the open field smite commanders. If you guys want a full video about the pincer formation, let me know in the comment section below. I know other creators have made videos talking about it, and you know, if you guys want my take on it, I can make a video explaining what you should do with pincer formation. But most likely, you know, TLDR, if you're just field fighting, you're probably going to use pincer formation, and that gives you a 10% bonus to smite damage. So all in all, we have 62% bonus to smite damage for William Wallace, which will change the math, right? Because, and again, all of this is napkin math, but if we only hit one target, all right, well, it's going to be the 2400, but it's going to be boosted by 62%. So it's actually 3888, right? And again, that's not, I'm not actually showing you the battle formula. I'm just trying to give you actual equivalent numbers after all the boosts are sort of accounted for, right? The max damage per skill cycle, that's what SC means right here, is 5346, right? This is literally just your total damage plus additional damage, because remember, this is also smite damage, right? So that's going to be multiplied by 1.62, and that's what is going to be the total if you're getting the maximum value out of the active skill here. And then the average damage per skill cycle is literally just these two divided by 2, right? It's just you're just averaging these two numbers, okay? Just so that way we have a sort of general idea as to on average how good are they going to be. Now William Wallace is going to lean more towards the low end here, because like I said, you're not going to get the max value out of his active skill most of the time, right? I mean, unless you're just running into sad face every single time and just constantly running into the murder ball and getting swarmed, or you're using attack march and you're just goofing off, I don't know, but yeah, that's how that works. So okay, now let's go ahead and reveal some of the more information for these other commanders, right? So as you'll notice here with Ragnar Prime, he is a beast. Okay, Ragnar Prime is an absolute beast. Let's go ahead and throw him up on the screen here. His active skill is a crazy 3 target AoE, and then he deals an additional 1800 with that expertise. It's actually wild. He pumps out a crazy amount of damage, and you can bump that 1800 up even more by grabbing the latent power skill over here. Talent, I should say. It's 6% bonus as well, and if you pair him with CPO Prime, it should also bump this up as well, although I haven't tested that, so don't quote me on that. But anyway, you'll notice the Ragnar Prime is an outlier here. He's a beast. Guan Yu has no actual bonus skill damage on his kit, except for if the target has a shield, or if they have a shield. I don't remember exactly, but it's most of the time not going to do anything, so that's why I didn't include it here, just like in my first video. Now I did bump up the additional damage on Liu Che, and the reason for that is because in a given skill cycle, that's what we're talking about here, in a full skill cycle, how much additional damage will you get from everything else that's on the kit here. So let me just go ahead and kind of explain why I bumped this up slightly. In the original video, I just assumed, okay, well, you're going to get the 300 smite damage here, and this expertise is probably going to pop twice in a given skill cycle, right? So that's 400 plus 300 is 700. I bumped this up a little bit because, first of all, this smite damage factor is going to be affected by multipliers such as having the pincer formation, or by the 10% normal damage bonus that Liu Che already has on his kit, right? So it's actually going to be a little bit more than 300 damage factor, and I still considered this combo attack to occur twice per skill cycle, right? It's going to happen 1 in 4 turns, and if you pop your active skill once every 8 turns, then 4 times 2 is 8. So yeah, it's probably going to happen twice, and again, this is RNG, so maybe it'll happen 0 times and maybe it'll happen 4 times, so just keep that in mind. Again, I'm going to say this once again before you guys comment it down below, it's napkin math. All right, now the last thing I want to mention here, just so that way you guys understand how these numbers are calculated, this is actually how the game determines the amount of skill damage that you're dealing, right? A lot of people always sort of wonder about the as it says right here, every additional target reduces the damage to each target by 15%. And so what some people think here is that it would be like, okay, if you hit 2 targets, that's 1 additional target, so it would be 2250 times 0.85 times 2, and then for 3 targets it would be 2250 times 0.7 times 3, right? That's not how that actually works, and the way that you know that is because if you do the math that way than if you did 5 targets, then you would actually be dealing less damage than if you did hit 4 targets. And so some people would say, okay, well, it actually, they just reduced that last additional target by some arbitrary number. No, this is as close as we can get. Actually, I don't know, we don't know the actual formula that they use in the game, but this is the closest possible way to mathematically calculate this. All right, and again, napkin math. So anyway, just wanted to clear that up because a lot of people actually don't know that. And so if you ever wanted to like run some spreadsheets yourself, now you've got a slightly more accurate way to calculate these numbers. But either way, this is kind of the damage output for these commanders. All right, all that being said, let's reveal Yu Liang as well, because this was present on the previous sheet and I wanted to correct some of the wrong data that was there. I was accidentally multiplying this by 1.15 instead of 1.35 because we have 35% extra here. Anyway, let's reveal some of these numbers for King Arthur and Bai Qi together. Okay, and if we reveal the total damage here, right, and this is the same formula that I was just explaining before for both of these commanders. As you can see in the total damage formula, the single highest hit here is Bai Qi, and that's why in my first video where I showed Bai Qi where he was first revealed, I was like, oh my god, that's the best active skill in the game, and it technically is, except it's actually not, and we'll explain that in just a second. All right, next let's reveal the additional damage here for both of these commanders, and as you can see here, the additional damage for Bai Qi is actually quite small. Now why is that? It comes from the active skill. All right, so each target has a 30% chance to take 15% extra damage. Okay, so a little less than 1 in 3 targets is going to take 2400 times 1.15, right? But it only happens to 30% of targets, so you're gonna get this probably at least once every skill cycle, but it's not going to happen to every target, right? So what I did was 15% of 2400 is 360. All right, so a little less than 1 in 3 targets is going to take an additional 360 damage, but to kind of factor in the fact that it's not going to happen very often, you multiply that by 0.3, right? Because it's a 30% chance of occurring, so you get 108. And remember, that is smite damage, so then you multiply that by 1.2. Why is it 1.2? Because of the information right here. You're going to have the 10% bonus to smite damage that you see, well, really it's a normal damage bonus that you see on Bai Qi's kit, and 10% from pincer formation, and that's where we get the 130 additional damage. Now the 1050 from King Arthur is actually a tremendous amount of additional damage, and that is assuming, and I should be very clear here, this entire video is assuming that your King Arthur is secondary. Okay, and that is because if you look at the expertise here, it says when serving as secondary, whenever you deal direct damage, you have a 25% chance to deal additional damage for 1 second to all targets of the direct damage, and the damage factor is equal to 50% of the direct damage's damage factor. So all right, if he's secondary, his damage factor is 2800, so we know that it's going to be, well, 50% of that is 1400, and it will hit all the targets, and the target's number is 3, so 1400 to 3 targets, but it's only a 25% chance of occurring. So you would do 1400 with a 25% chance of occurring would be 1400 times 0.25, so it'd be on average 350, but you're hitting 3 targets, so you multiply that by 3, and that's how you get the 1050. It's actually a really good expertise, especially when he's secondary, right? But that's not where the beauty ends for King Arthur, because he also has a crazy amount of skill damage as a secondary. First of all, he gets 30% if he's hitting something on the map. It says it right here, if you're attacking a field troop, the bonuses are multiplied by 3, so you get 30% skill damage, plus you're going to have 5% from Ottoman Empire, plus 5% from the wedge formation, plus 5% from Twilight Falls is 15%. So that's where we get this 15% on all of these different marches, by the way. All right, though that's like the same across the board. All those are probably going to be true for you if you've been building your account in that direction, which most players have. So with all that being said, let's reveal the numbers here and we'll see who actually has the strongest active skill, and the answer is pretty clear. All right, pretty clear. The answer is our boy King Arthur. So let's go ahead and pull that into a chart, shall we? Let's go ahead and see. So the blue bar is if you're only hitting 1 target. Okay, and what we'll notice here actually is that if you're only planning on hitting 1 target, so for example like swarming down a flag, then William Wallace is actually the way to go, right? He has the highest single target hit here of the infantry commanders. Ragnar Prime is a close second. King Arthur obviously is cavalry, so he doesn't count. So after all is said and done, we have a very strong active skill from Bai Qi, but not technically the strongest active skill in the game. And remember, the bonuses on King Arthur are guaranteed. You're always going to get that 30% on his skill. You're always going to get the 15% from Ottoman, Twilight Falls, and wedge formation. That's always going to happen. And that's not even to take into account, you know, if you're pairing him behind Huo's going to have 25% minimum plus other things. So again, this is napkin math, keeping it simple. But basically what we can learn here is that Bai Qi is hitting almost as hard as commanders like Zhuge Liang and Liu Che. Now, I will also also say that the downside of skill damage, right, like Zhuge Liang and King Arthur, is that it is easier to mitigate skill damage. In other words, there's more ways to reduce the skill damage that you take than there are ways to reduce the normal damage that you take. Now, a good example of this is in talents, right? Every commander with the skill tree has Heraldic Shield, which means you take 6% less skill damage, and every cavalry commander on the open field has Emblazoned Shield, who takes 12% less skill damage, right? So just keep that in mind, that, you know, by default, some of these commanders, like even if we look at, you know, the Ragnar Primes in the field, they're going to have Heraldic Shield. The Zhuge Liangs are going to have Heraldic Shield, right? Like everyone has pretty much, not everyone, but most armies in the field have at least 6% skill damage taken reduction. Even the Smite tree has Thick Skin, which takes 6% less skill damage, right? So that's sort of the downside, I would say, to skill damage, is just how many commanders mitigate that skill damage. But again, that's a little bit harder to control than everything else here. So TLDR, okay, Bai Qi is it's effectively getting another Liu Che active skill, right? I mean, that's what this is. As you can see here, the average is, I mean, it's basically the same, right? But what this doesn't take into account is the smite damage factor that we see on Bai Qi, right? Like when you spend the 10 stacks of Malice, you hit the target with the 300 damage factor. That, I don't know how often that's going to actually work in the open field, so I have no way of including that here, right? Like, do I just add a flat 300 to it, or like what should we, I mean, you guys can let me know in the comment section below what would be a good way to value that extra 300, but it's only ever going to pop if you have enough Malice stacks and you're targeting somebody with fewer Malice stacks than you have, right? So there's kind of two conditions there. One, you've built up enough Malice stacks, and two, your target is low, right? So like I don't know how to incorporate that here, so I just wanted to keep it as simple as possible. The truth is that your Bai Qi damage factor will be slightly higher than this on a single skill cycle basis, right, depending on how often that 300 goes. But that's why I say that having Bai Qi is effectively another Liu Che, because even though it's slightly lower here, the extra smite damage from the Malice stacks is going to compensate for that in some way. Maybe it's a little bit higher or lower than Liu Che in total. But okay, so now we know that he is quite good. As we see here, Ragnar Prime absolutely just giga chatting all over the place, right? Like that is just nuts. It's such a strong active skill, like so good. But with that being said, the active skill is not the complete picture, as we know. Let's take a look at the stat breakdown between these different commanders. Okay, now as I mentioned before, we do not include King Arthur and Zhuge Liang here because those would not be part of your infantry armies, because they are not infantry commanders. In some KVKs they might be, but for the simplicity of this video, we're just going to keep it simple. So here you can see all the different commanders that we've been talking about so far for infantry. The red is their attack stat, the blue is their defense stat, the green is their health stat, and the yellow is their march speed. And as we can see here, Bai Qi is just a slightly worse CPO prime, right? Like he's the same. He has more consistent march speed than CPO. CPO has a little bit of a conditional there. I averaged it out to 20, but it's a little conditional. Bai Qi just has less health, right? So like, yeah, it is what it is. If we compare that to other commanders, it's similar to William Wallace in that he hits a little bit harder with more attack stat, but everything else is the same there. He's also faster on average than Ragnar, although Ragnar can steal some march speed. Ragnar has way more defense, right? So what this does is it helps us see just how tanky will Bai Qi be, and the answer is he won't be, right? There's just nothing here besides attack and a little bit of health, right? So now that we've covered everything with a little bit more detail, has my opinion of Bai Qi changed at all? And the answer is a little bit, right? It's a little bit. His active skill is one of the strongest in the game, don't get me wrong, but it's not the single strongest like I initially thought off of my sort of knee-jerk reaction, right? Also, the Malice stack sort of gimmick here is cool, and I get what they're trying to do, right? Like literally deity of death. Like he's known for being the one that will finish off the target, right? Like he's going to be the sad face king. But you know, when you think about in the open field who gets the most kill points, it's not the person that's targeting the red marches, right? It's the person targeting the white marches, because if you're targeting healthy marches, they have more troops to lose. Yeah, so that's kind of how I'm looking at Bai Qi now. I don't love his gimmick of the Malice stacks, to be like quite frank with you guys. I think, you know, we'll have to wait and see how often this actually pops, and how, you know, with him not being tanky, how can he last long enough in the battlefield to get a lot of this stuff to stack up, is kind of what I'm thinking, right? Especially if you're pairing him with Liu Che, which I think is the knee-jerk reaction. Very squishy, right? Very squishy glass cannon. And so I still think that's probably the best pair, but like if you're running two infantry armies, I think it's going to be probably Bai Qi with Liu Che and also the Ragnar CPO. That's probably the two best in my opinion. We'll have to wait and see with testing. interesting. But I also feel like I'm leaning even more towards pairing him with Philip now, because I feel like the Philip pairing gives him a bunch of defense, which he really wants. It gives him 30% all damage, which we love. It gives him an instant proc and a rage debuff, which is cool. And there's a 20% chance that you get that strong active skill again. Now, I will say that the expertise on Philip is not something you should ever bank on, right? Because if you ever just watch your Philip in the open field, this pops very infrequently, right? Like, first of all, it has a low proc chance to begin with, and then there's a 7-second cooldown where you can't even get it anyway, right? So I don't love, like, you know, there is technically synergy here in the fact that the active skill on Bai Qi is crazy, and so casting it again would be really good, but you're not gonna cast it again most of the time. Like, it's very rare that you're gonna get that double cast, but it will happen occasionally. So all in all, like, yeah, there's a little bit of synergy here, but really the synergy comes in the form of the defense, right? I want the infantry defense, I want the instant proc damage, I want the all damage, and then the active skill on Philip is really just an afterthought, right? Like, it just so happens to buff nearby armies, so that's cool, I guess, right? A 2-second buff is never anything that I'm going to spend a lot of time thinking about, but I mean, it's a nice little cherry on top, I guess. The only thing that I hate about this pairing is that there is no combo damage on Bai Qi, and therefore there will not be additional opportunities to cast this instant proc, right? It's not like it's going to be another Liu Che Alex, right? It'll be close, but you're just not going to pop this as often as you would pop it on Liu Che because of that combo attack, right? So I mean, if they gave Bai Qi combo attacks, it would be GG. I think he would be probably the best commander in the game, but without that, I feel like the Bai Qi Philip is going to be almost as good as the Liu Che Alex, but not quite there. I almost wonder if you would do the Bai Qi Alex, right? Because on average, you know, you're gonna have the bonus defense on Alex's 4th skill like for maybe 1 or 2 turns, right? And that's 30% defense, you know, so for 30% defense for a quarter of your skill cycle, right? It's not that much defense. It's like 7-8% defense on average plus the 20% here. So let's say he has 28% defense plus 6% normal damage take reduction. I feel like if they gave Alex a 3rd tier, then I would say Alex is slightly tankier than Philip, and I would rather have the Alex with the Bai Qi, especially because he has more attack, right? You just have a crazy amount of attack there. Misses the all damage though, right? So, you know, it's a give and take. But and the shield, I mean, the shield's not great, but it does reduce some small amount of damage that you take. So I don't know. I guess the question is, like, whose instant proc do you want to cast more, Alex's or Philip's, right? And the answer is probably Philip. So if that's the case, maybe you do just run the Liu Che with Philip, and then you run the Bai Qi with Alex, and you just give all the stats to Bai Qi, and hopefully that keeps him alive for a little bit longer. And he also can't be debuffed from the all damage reducing debuffs, right? So that's cool at least. But anyway, hopefully you guys found this video interesting or informative or entertaining or whatever. Like I said, I did something in this video that the internet generally hates, and that is having a nuanced take on things. I think it's really easy to be like, oh, Bai Qi's broken, or oh my god, Bai Qi's trash compared to Arthur, right? Like, those are the easiest things to think, and the truth is neither of them are technically true. The answer is somewhere in the middle, because the world is shades of gray, right? So we're a little bit nuanced in this video, and I wanted to make sure that I make this video because I think it's not that helpful to either be a, you know, purely hyped or purely negative. Neither of those things are very helpful, right? The truth lies somewhere in the middle. Really, how good Bai Qi it comes out to be is gonna boil down to how quickly can he stack Malice, and how often will it actually proc in real world PvP fighting. Dueling with this March is gonna be I mean, I might do an early test results video of Bai Qi, but I feel like duel results are gonna be so skewed, it's not gonna really, I don't know if it'll even really be that helpful. I mean, let me know in the comment section below if you guys want me to do early test results for Bai Qi. Yeah, we'll just have to wait and see. I think that 10% bonus to Sev wounds could be a sleeper bonus, right? Even though it's only for 1 second. I don't know, that could add up over time. It might make the reports look pretty nasty, so I don't know, we'll have to wait and see. I'm excited for Bai Qi. I will probably like instant max him. If you wanted to do a budget build for Bai Qi, right, like let's assume that this expertise is not very good, right? Let's say you don't care about the expertise. I feel like a 5-5-1-5 Bai Qi would be pretty good, right? Because you're getting all the stats in AoE. The 3rd skill is, you know, it's conditional on when this occurs, and it's a pretty low damage factor anyway, so it's like you're getting a 1/3 of the benefit bit out of this active skill, or out of this third skill, by having it at 1. And then the fourth skill, you do want the 10% more normal damage, I would say, because that boosts your active skill. So 5515 would be fine. If you got like 5533 or something in the middle, I think that'd be fine as well, right? You still get a 7% normal damage bonus, and 200 damage factor. So there's that. However, the skills fall maybe, but I do think that Bai Qi could be a contender for a budget build commander. Again, we'll have to wait and see how much of his skills or his value comes from the second and third skill. But let me know in the comment section below if you want to see some early test results, like pre-release test results for Bai Qi. Again, I don't know how meaningful they'll be, because there's going to be just so much to consider there that it's really going to come down to how he actually works in the open field. With that being said, though, if you made it to the end of this video, make sure you drop a thumbs up on it. Helps out the channel a ton. It helps get this video out into the YouTube algorithm so other Rise of Kingdoms players might see it. And while you're down there, consider subscribing to the channel and clicking the bell to be notified the next time I upload a Rise of Kingdoms video, because 65% of you guys are not subscribed to the channel. So make sure you go ahead and double check. You might think you're subbed, but you're not. And for those of you that have subbed already, a tremendous thank you. Seriously, thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys subbing, and everyone who just watches the videos and hangs out on the channel means a lot to me. So thank you guys so much. And comment down below your thoughts on Bai Qi. Do you appreciate these nuanced takes, or would you rather me just be like, he's the best, or oh no, he's way worse than Arthur? Let me know in the comment section below what you think of videos like this. And with that being said, guys, thank you so much for watching. This has been Omniarch. I will talk to you guys again soon. Peace.